Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canada is in a recession. But the Liberals, and even some of their apologists among the punditry, say that it is only a technical recession. So allow me to get technical for a few moments. Technically, economic growth is shrinking, and that's how we measure the strength of a national economy. Technically, 40,000 more Canadians are out of work so far this year. Technically, the cost of living has left millions of Canadians unable to afford basic necessities like food. Technically, under these Liberals, Canadian families are the most indebted in the world, which means they're tapped out, Madam Speaker, and can't lead the way out of a recession through increased consumption. Technically, young Canadians are giving up on the dream of home ownership, and with it the dream of starting their own families, because Canadians technically have the most unaffordable housing among peer countries. Technically, Madam Speaker, over the last 11 years, these Liberals have passed a series of laws and ministerial orders that prevent Canada from bringing its resource wealth to world markets and provide high-paying jobs for Canadians. Technically, this Liberal finance minister would make Chrystia Freeland and Bill Morneau blush over the fire hose of new spending and federal debt that young Canadians know they're going to be on the hook for. Technically, the PBO says the finance minister misled Canadians in his budget. So today, we're having a debate about the recession that these Liberals are responsible for and demand specific actions in response. And Madam Speaker, I can already hear the howls of protest from these Liberals who say things like, well, what about the tariffs? What about the war in Ukraine? What about the war in Iran? Well, Madam Speaker, these global events affect every single other economy in the world. And before I hear even more howls of Liberals claiming, well, don't those Conservatives know that Canada is more vulnerable because we are more trade dependent on the United States than those other countries are? Let me say this, Madam Speaker. It is those same Liberals who claimed that their leader would have a trade deal with the United States by the summer of 2025. They are the same Liberals who spent the last 11 years actively preventing Canada from diversifying its export markets by systematically preventing the construction of the energy infrastructure necessary to export Canadian energy to the world. So yes, Madam Speaker, energy, Canadian oil and gas. Canadian oil and gas, that's by far Canada's most valuable export. It dwarfs everything else. Oil and gas exports are worth $160 billion a year, Madam Speaker. And the Prime Minister said that he had the experience for this moment and assured Canadians that he would be successful in defending Canada's interests by negotiating a deal with the Americans while diversifying our trade. So what has the Prime Minister done, Madam Speaker? He teased Canadians by saying that it was time to get things built. He teased Canadians by claiming that his government would see that major projects would be built at speeds thought unimaginable. Well, Madam Speaker, I thought that might mean that a year after he made these claims, there would be some kind of approval on the horizon for a pipeline project. I could easily imagine that, Madam Speaker. In fact, I could imagine maybe one like the Pacific North Coast Pipeline that the previous Conservative government approved and that the Liberals cancelled only a few days after they were sworn in November 2015. A decision endorsed by this Prime Minister at an Energy Committee meeting in 2021. He said then, 5 years ago, he said that he supported cancelling Northern Gateway. And now all of a sudden, he's scratching his head saying, yeah, maybe we should build some major projects. But the projects aren't being built. The Northern Gateway pipeline that this government cancelled and this Prime Minister opposed did not get built. If it was, it would be carrying 525,000 barrels a day today to world markets. At today's prices, Madam Speaker, that would bring about $20 billion per year to the Canadian economy. Would we be in a recession today, Madam Speaker, if the Canadian economy had another 525,000 barrels a day in exported production? I don't know, but it would sure be better than what we have now. What if we had built an East Coast pipeline too, Madam Speaker? Think of what that would mean for world energy security. Think of what it would mean for the Canadian economy. The opportunities squandered by these Liberals, Madam Speaker, contribute to the recession we're in now, and they've prevented Canada from being part of the international solution to world markets that are cut off from the Middle East and from those that want to defund Putin's war machine. So far, Madam Speaker, all this government has done is create a so-called major projects office that will have incredible sweeping powers of exemption from Canadian law. It was set up nearly a full year ago, and there are no major projects. On top of the economic self-harm that these Liberals have imposed on Canada, 11 years of incessant debt, deficits, and money printing have left Canadians deeply in debt and unable to afford necessities. As bad as Bill Morneau and Chrystia Freeland were, the current finance minister, Madam Speaker, is even worse. The current finance minister might end up challenging Alan McEachern and Mark Lalonde as perhaps the worst finance minister in Canadian history. Remember those guys? Those were the guys who ran up deficits in the 80s that were so big that by the time the Liberals were defeated in 1984, Canada was literally kiting interest payments by issuing new debt just to cover the interest on the existing debt. That disastrous time under those Liberals took successive governments, Conservative, Liberal, and Conservative, to restore sanity to Canada's finances. And now this government is threatening to take us back to those dark times, Madam Speaker. After Pierre Trudeau, there was a consensus that balanced budgets matter and ought to be every government's goal, and these Liberals have blown it, despite their 2015 promise, Madam Speaker. So last week, there were a series of terrible reports that challenged the very credibility of this government and the finance minister. The parliamentary budget officer published a report that says the deficit will be billions of dollars higher than the finance minister said in his budget. It'll be higher this year, higher next year, and every year in the projection. The parliamentary budget officer said that spending will be higher. She said that borrowing will be higher. She said expected income tax revenues will be lower because she expects Canadians will have less income than the finance minister projects. And she said that based on their stress tests, which, quote, draws on decades of Canadian economic and fiscal history, including recessions, financial crises, oil price crashes, and runs thousands of combinations to show the range of possibilities, that the likelihood of the deficit to GDP ratio will decline is less than 1%. So that was their latest fiscal anchor, the one they came up with when their last fiscal anchor was cut loose. They said that the deficit will decline as a percentage of GDP every year through 2031, and the PBO said the odds of that happening are less than 1%. So, Madam Speaker, after 11 years, they've made promise after promise after promise about fiscal anchors and guardrails, and they've broken every single one of them. The finance minister is like a sailor who forgets to connect the anchor chain to the boat, then he drops the anchor in the water, and then has to go back to the chandlery to get a new anchor while everybody on the dock laughs at him. I can only imagine what next year's fiscal anchor is going to be. This latest anchor, the one that's already on the bottom of the ocean with no chain allowing the budget to drift toward the rocks, was never even a good anchor to start with. In fact, the PBO notes that the IMF thinks Canada would be better off with their old anchor of a declining debt to GDP ratio, but that anchor is also overboard on the bottom of the ocean. It's been dumped overboard without a chain I don't know how many times. So Canadians are increasingly asking why the Liberals can't table a plan to return to the balanced budget that they've started with in 2015. Many witnesses at the Finance Committee have called upon them to do so. But this minister, in his arrogance and hubris, refuses, and he lectures those that ask him to simply do what his government promised to do way back in 2015. And it's not just the PBO, not just Finance Committee witnesses, and not just Conservatives challenging the wisdom and credibility of the government's budgets. Two of Canada's major banks dropped reports downgrading their forecasts for the Canadian economy to below 1%. So given the fact that Canada is in recession and that this government's budget outlook is deteriorating and lacks credibility, Conservatives ask this House to call on the government to reverse its 11 years of continued deficits, broken fiscal promises, rein in its spending and borrowing before things really do spiral out of their control.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Chief Government Whip.
The member mentioned Liberal pundits at the beginning of his speech. Here's something that a pundit said. A pundit said, "It's dangerous politics to be going out here claiming the sky is falling, when in a month's time or 2 months' time, when the next numbers come out, it shows that it isn't." It was a week later. Job numbers are better than they were last quarter. We have the C.D. Howe Institute coming out and arguing, and other economists saying it's not a recession. Right. You know which pundit that was? Fred Delory, the former Conservative campaign manager for Aaron O'Toole, who said that on CBC. Would the member like to comment on the comments of his Conservative friends' punditry?
Honourable member for Calgary-Crowfoot, order.
Well, there we go again, Madam Speaker. Another Liberal who would tell Canadians they've never had it so good and will deny that they are in recession, deny that the PBO and private sector economists have downgraded their growth projections and that they're misleading the House in their budgets.
The
Honourable Member for Rimouski-Lamatapédia. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. The Conservatives keep saying that we have to invest in fossil fuels. They want to approve new pipelines out west. We know that the Trudeau government bought a pipeline that cost $34 billion. And then if we want to sell it tomorrow, we'll have to sell it at a loss. So can my colleague tell me the following? Is inflationary spending the case when you buy a new pipeline? Is that inflationary spending?
Madam Speaker, he brings up the Trans Mountain pipeline. And again, Conservatives weren't calling upon the government to buy Trans Mountain and build it themselves. They were calling upon the government to stop moving the goalposts on their approval process so that Kinder Morgan would commit and build it at their own expense. The Conservatives don't believe in the public sector taking over and intruding that which should be left to private investors. Let's just get the government out of the way so that actual private investors with their own money will invest in Canada's energy infrastructure and allow our production to increase. This isn't about subsidizing anything. This is about getting the government out of the way.
Questions and commentaires? No. Questions and comments, the Honourable Member. Sorry. The Honourable Member for King Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to ask my honourable colleague, you know, this Liberal government keeps telling us how good we have it. Well, I'm here to tell you that 2.2 million people have been using the food bank. 8.3% of those clients are seniors, up from 6.9%. Can he please address this House as to why the Liberals don't care about seniors anymore?
Honourable Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
Well, Madam Speaker, the Liberal government has had no, they simply seem oblivious to the struggle of real Canadians, whether they are seniors, whether they are young people, whether they are really anybody, Madam Speaker, who other than they seem more focused on these large bureaucratic structures, giving themselves more power to use public money to interfere in what would normally be private investment decisions. I can only imagine where their sovereign wealth fund is going to take us in the world of corporate welfare and insider enrichment. I don't believe that these Liberals really are in touch with what's going on the ground, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Député de Mirabel.
The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Madam Speaker, repetition is a pedagogical tool, so perhaps I'll repeat my colleague's question. $35 billion in public money for a pipeline. Is that inflationary spending? Is it inflationary spending to spend $34 billion in a pipeline? Is $34 billion in public funds inflationary spending, Madam Speaker? You're not always patient, but I'm not going to repeat the question a fifth time. It's a clear question. Is $34 billion in public fund for a pipeline inflationary spending? Yes or no?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
Well, Madam Speaker, I don't know. Probably is. We didn't ask the federal government to borrow public money to build that pipeline. We asked them to get out of the way so that a private business would invest its money without a hit to the public treasury and to allow the thing to get built on its own. I don't know why the Bloc seems keen to call on Conservatives to defend that decision. We never defended that decision.